Howdy, signing sheriff here. Time for a history lesson. So before I get into the history that I was referring to, I wanted to make a small apology. I made a video back when, I can't tell you which video because it was a random little clip that I added into the middle of a video. But that little clip was inspired by Saint Andrew TV. I'll add a picture of the YouTube channel I'm referring to. One of the things he did in one of his videos, again, I can't find out which video because it was a random action in the middle of one of his videos. But that little action I copied. So I wanted to thank Saint Andrew for giving me the idea for that attempted funny moment in my video. So now, continuing from there, some people have asked me in person, nobody's really asked me in the comments section, but anywho, people ask me all the time why I dress like Sheriff Woody. So I wanted to give an explanation, not an excuse, an explanation for that. But I'm gonna have to do this only using voice because trying to think of some of the signs for what I would have to say will be a little bit difficult in the moment. So I'm going to switch to, I think that's called this word version, so I can add the words next to me. And I will talk, but the words that I'm using will appear next to me so that the deaf or hard of hearing can still understand what I'm talking about. So most of my apparel is inspired or influenced by memories or by my self-defense gear. More so on the latter. As an explanation, when I was much younger, I'm 25 now, when I was relatively 12 or 13, I began to notice that I was carrying around knives with me. My max number of knives I could carry on my person back when I was first carrying them was I carried 10 knives on me at the same time in different locations. Eventually, I noticed that none of my family carried knives around, and every time they needed a knife, they would ask me for one. So I started trying to do research by talking to people who carried around stuff like that as well, I figured out that the standard use for knives was for self-defense. So I decided that meant that I was my family's protector. Obviously, I'm referring to my biological family by that remark. This is when I was living down in southern Illinois in a city called Heron. So I began carrying knives for the purpose of self-defense, as well as everyday utilization. But part of my problem is that my adopted family also thinks that I have undiagnosed OCD, which is one of the reasons I always wear long sleeves and boots. The boots are more because my feet don't like tennis shoes, but that's a separate issue. So, growing up from about 12 to 13 all the way up till age about 19, I started flip-flopping back and forth between different self-defense gear options. Typically, I would carry around a knife, then I would carry around more than one knife, then I would try to figure out what knife worked better than the other ones, so on and so forth. I eventually figured out that there were 3 different types of knives that worked very good for self-defense. The fixed blade knife, which is what I'm carrying on my person right now. The OTF knife, which is the kind of knife that I carried when I was first starting to make YouTube videos. And what I believe is referred to as a switchblade, the assisted opening ones that have the tab, you flick it and the blade flips out. So, being the slightly obsessive individual that I am, or at the time, should I say was, I bought myself almost every different type of switchblade. I bought myself an OTF knife, and I experimented with different types of fixed blade knives. I discovered that I cannot work with a push button switchblade, which I didn't realize at the time was actually illegal in the state of Illinois where I lived. My bad. I figured out that I worked best with the tab button mechanism. So I got myself a few different sizes, so I had a variety to choose from. And I also figured out that it works better to carry around a small fixed blade knife, kind of like what I've got on my belt right now. The handle, or should I say grip, is just barely big enough I can get all my fingers on it, but it's also small enough that it's easy to hide. When I first moved up here, I began working in the First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana. I was working on a bus route. One of the bus workers that I was constantly working with on Saturday mornings to afternoons carried around a baton that he got from Smith & Wesson, I believe. Of course, at the time, I had no idea what it was because I had never seen a police officer use one. I'd never seen them used in a movie before, so I was completely oblivious to what this thing was. He showed it to me, and I was entranced. So he very kindly tried to explain to me how it worked, what it was used for. I was soaking it up. So I finally decided I need to get myself one of these. So I ordered myself a baton that I began experimenting with in different positions. I figured out that I worked better with the baton on my back, which is where I carried it when I carried it around. At this point, I gave that baton to my brother Greg because I began carrying around other self-defense items. Some people from that time period began referring to me as Batman because I would carry around countless items on my belt in a utility belt. I carried around portable chargers, charging cords, headache medicine. I carried all sorts of stuff in there. But on the other side, I would carry a phone, my baton, pepper spray, a knife. I would carry all sorts of stuff on my belt, to the point that people began getting scared of me, because they knew if I'm reaching toward my belt, there's a 50-50 chance I'm reaching for some sort of weapon. Please refer to my video on what is a weapon and what isn't to see why I used air quotes. They thought there was a 50-50 chance I would reach for one of my weapons, or for something to charge a phone, to what have you. So in order to try to alleviate people's fears, I began dressing in costume. As well as because one of the guys that I respected in the building that I was living in at the time recommended that I was unintentionally dressing as if I was in cosplay already, but I kind of tried to keep it hidden. He told me that he noticed when I dressed in costume, it brought out a slightly more kind, goofy, easier to get along with, whatever you want to call it, version of me. So he recommended that I just learn to adapt myself to this character that clearly made me feel more comfortable. So I went with it full force. The original outfits that I had in my what I call my regalia, I could dress as a spy, I could dress as Sherlock Holmes, I could dress as a pirate, or I could dress as a cowboy. Cowboy option not being Sheriff Woody, just generic cowboy. So eventually I began to notice that everybody remembered me more when I dressed like Sherlock Holmes. So I began dressing like Sherlock Holmes the majority of the time. Every once in a while, I would switch to one of the other regalias if the need so called for it. But typically I would walk around dressed like Sherlock Holmes. Then I moved down south again, back to Southern Illinois. Sherlock Holmes didn't exactly fit in down there. I still dressed like him most of the time, but it didn't quite fit in. Eventually I moved back up here again, and I went right back to going with my costume regalia full force because it made me feel natural. However, I would say maybe 3 months after I moved back up here, an individual that lives very close to my family and I made a very blatant verbal threat against the family. At the time, the only self-defense gear that I carried on me were knives, the baton, and a container of pepper spray. Technically pepper gel. I feared for my family's safety because I didn't think I would be able to take care of the situation with the items that I had on my person. So I ordered myself my first gun, my Bursa Thunder 380. I picked 380 because that was the quote-unquote the lowest caliber I would recommend for self-defense, as quoted by one of my adopted siblings in the church. Okay, made sense to me, so I went with it. Here's the problem with firearms. They're very, as long as you don't have anything bad in your background, they're very easy to order, but they are extremely difficult to get rid of. And you have to experiment a lot to figure out exactly what kind of gun, what caliber of gun, how many rounds, all these different things about guns match you as an individual. I figured out very quickly the strength of the 380 cartridge required a very strong spring in the slide. And the recoil, whereas it was not as powerful as a 9mm, the 380 is referred to as 9mm short, but anywho, most people don't know that. The gun kicked a little bit more than I could comfortably handle, by which I mean I went to a gun range once. Big shout out to Deb's Gun Range, by the way. They are my typical gun range that I use because they're inexpensive. It's very easy to work with the system, and as long as you're not doing something irresponsible, such as pointing the gun at the camera while you're filming, they have no problem with me taking my tripod with me and filming while I'm shooting. So, very large shout out and large thank you to Deb's Gun Range for their assistance. They're not a sponsor of this video, but I do want to give them a big shout out and a big thank you. So, the first time I visited Deb's Gun Range, I took my Burst of Thunder 380 with me. Of course, it was the only gun I had at the time, so can't really take another gun. Because I believed, and I still believe, if you purchase a gun for self-defense, you need to fire it at least once. Why? Because if you have a gun for self-defense and you've never shot it, and you get into a situation that you need to shoot the gun, you're going to pull that thing out, fire it, and the boink is going to catch you completely off guard because you've never felt it. Very seldom. Now, I personally would say about 50-50, but it depends on where you go to find your statistics. I would personally say that there's a 50-50 shot, no pun intended with the word shot, that you're going to pull out your gun and only fire a single shot. And there's also a 50-50 chance you're going to pull out your gun and fire 2 or more rounds. If the situation that you're in is in that second 50%, going off of my mental statistics here, the 50-50, if you're in that section of 50 that you fire more than one shot and you're not accustomed to the recoil, you're going to do this. Bang, bang. The second shot is going to go roughly about 2 inches above head level for a natural individual. Depending on how far away, obviously. There's several factors that you have to consider. But for a normal situation, people are usually about 6 to 12 feet away. If you're closer than that, then it doesn't matter what's going on. If you fire a shot, you're probably going to hit your target because he's close enough you can probably touch him. But that's beside the point. If the situation is beyond arm's reach and you fire a shot, the likelihood that the first shot's going to hit the person, great. Usually people pull out their gun and point at roughly here, somewhere in this general vicinity, because that's where your hands normally go. As you can tell by every time I put my hands out like this, they go to the same level. That's not training. I have not trained professionally. I am not a professional, but people's hands naturally want to aim somewhere in this vicinity. If you fire your first shot, and let's say you hit right smack on the sternum, the recoil of a 380 would bounce about this high. Second shot from that vantage point would be somewhere roughly around face height. But if you aren't accustomed to shooting that thing, you're probably also going to do this, bang. So the gun is not going to go perfectly straight up. So if you manage to aim right smack at the sternum, the second shot's probably going to go off this direction or this direction. The likelihood that the second shot you fire is actually going to hit the person in the face is pretty slim. Same idea with a 9mm. If you've never fired a gun before, a 9mm is a very bad idea for your first handgun, and a very bad idea if you've never trained with a gun before, like I had, or should I say hadn't. So I went to the gun range. I test fired the gun. Okay, I fired. The guy at the gun range recommended that I never load more than 5 shots while I was practice firing. I took his advice, and I'm glad I did. At the end of the session, I fired, I think I had a 50-round box of ammunition, and I fired just under the entire box. So somewhere roughly in the range of about 45 shots-ish. I had 2 mags. One was a 7-round, and the other one was an 8-round. So, given the idea that I fired 5 shots max out of those magazines, that means I was firing roughly about 3 through 5 shots every time I loaded the magazine. With a 3-shot minimum and a 5-shot maximum, that means that I was able to figure out what happened if I fired 2 shots in nearly rapid succession. They'd said no rapid fire because they knew that I was a new shooter. So they didn't want me to go bang, bang. So I realized very quickly, this was not a very good gun for me. I have very good strength in my fingers, but not in my wrists. So I can push down, but my wrist strength, if the gun goes off and I have a 9mm, it's going to go doink pretty hard. I grip the gun really well, which is one of the reasons why this thing works so well for me, because when I'm holding this, and yes, my finger is on the trigger, but it can't fire unless the hammer is pulled back. I can only get this finger on here for grip, but by squeezing that one finger, I can control that gun with no problem. And why is that? It's a 22. And the weird thing that I've never really understood why this is, from what I understand, gun calibers go from 22 to 22 Magnum and then jump all the way up to 38 Special. Okay. With semi-automatic loads, you have a few more steps in the middle. But going from what you can use in a semi-automatic or a revolver, so basically I figured out that I couldn't control the gun very well. Okay, second problem was there's too many options for where to hold the stinking thing. I tried a leg holster. It didn't work very well because it was so generic. It didn't fit good. I tried an appendix carry. That worked probably the best out of all the positions that I tried it in. I tried whatever you call the one right on the top of your hip. I tried in the back. I tried a shoulder holster. The only thing that really felt comfortable was appendix. But it was awkward in my Sherlock Holmes getup. So then I got myself a Rock Island Armory M200. 38 Special. That thing was a little bit easier to control, but it was still pretty bad because it's a pretty powerful cartridge. It still bounced pretty hard. That thing felt more natural because it was simpler to use. The problem was it didn't match the Sherlock Holmes outfit. So I began dressing like a cowboy to match the gun. So that me carrying this gun on my hip, because I got myself a normal Western style holster because it made sense for my gun. I began dressing like a cowboy because I wanted to match the gun and make it so that people weren't scared. Because if you see a guy dressed in a cowboy outfit with a gun, the likelihood that you're going to think that it's real is slim. The first thing that pops into people's heads is, oh, that thing's a costume prop. Okay, works for me. The problem was people still got scared because I looked like a generic cowboy. Well, at one point, I accidentally forgot to wear my jacket. And I was not wearing a black shirt at the time. I think I was wearing a yellow one or something like that. So I had a bright colored shirt. I was wearing a vest, which did not have the cow print fabric on it at the time. I was wearing a dark colored vest. Excuse me. Light colored shirt. Cowboy hat. My pant legs had unexpectedly gone inside my boot. On both sides. I mean, obviously I had a gun holster with a gun in it. So somebody walked past me and commented, "Hey, look, it's Sheriff Woody." First time I heard that, as soon as I heard it, the idea came to me. If I dressed in an outfit that everybody would associate with a movie character, it would be a lot easier for them to get the idea that I'm in costume. So I went to Hobby Lobby, purchased a bunch of cow print fabric, and did what you see today. Put cow print fabric on my jacket so that I can put the jacket on and people can see me from the back, people can see me from the front, people can see me from the side. They see the cow print fabric, they see a cowboy hat, they see a holster. Oh, hey, I know that character. That's Sheriff Woody. Now, I haven't gotten around to putting cow print fabric on the back of my vest yet. But, theoretically, I take the jacket off, cow print fabric on the back of the vest, cow print fabric on the side of the vest, cow print fabric on the front of the vest. Still gets the idea across. I don't have to necessarily wear the jacket. I feel a lot more comfortable wearing the jacket because it's the only way I can carry around this humongous wallet of mine. And I also carry one of my phones in this pocket, which is currently the one I'm recording on, and I forgot about it. Oops. So, all that story to say this. Why did I start dressing as Sheriff Woody? Very simple. Somebody at a random moment called me Sheriff Woody, and I realized that if I dressed as an obvious kids movie character, the gun probably wouldn't scare anybody. As well as the fact that dressing like Sheriff Woody puts people at their ease because they think it's funny. And if I see a kid, they're going to go, "Hey, look!" And they realize, cowboy. And some of them realize, oh, I know that cowboy. It's Sheriff Woody. So, there's a long story short. As well as an unintentional blurb in there about why I switched to 22 long rifle and Magnum. Didn't exactly intend to put that in there, but free history information for that one. So, I hope you found this informative / interesting, and I will see you in the next video, and happy trails.